I've been giving some lectures at colleges and universities recently, and I've had some repeated questions from students. So I really wanted to create a video that would allow me to share some of the knowledge I've gained from starting a creative business and some of my process behind designing and making pieces. I'm Teagan Green. I'm a clothing designer and maker based in a shopping studio in Penzance in Cornwall. The first section is all about design research. This is probably my favourite part of the whole process. I love getting stuck into research and looking at a real variety of things, and so often I have an idea that I think I'm quite clear about where I want it to go, and then once I start doing some research it develops into something completely new, and I so enjoy that part of the process where things move quite organically or something different catches your eye and your idea kind of really flourishes into something really fresh. When I was at university, I didn't always sort of see the point of keeping a sketchbook. I used to find it quite tedious to have to leave the work I was making to then record it in my sketchbook. But since I've started doing my own work, I moved away from sketchbooks for a while, but have recently come back to one because now it seems so relevant to me to be able to record little notes as I go. In my work, I look at a lot of sort of paintings and old images, and then I pull colour from them, and that's often how I springboard onto a print. There's often colour combinations of things that I wouldn't have thought I'd have been particularly interested in, and yet then when you start exploring them a little bit further, they create a whole new palette I would never have landed at if I'd not been looking at that research to begin with. It's important when you're doing research to not try and tie yourself to a process that doesn't really work for you. If it doesn't feel relevant and you don't feel like you're getting much from it, don't force yourself to do it. There's a very good chance you just don't need to do that part. Again, it took me a little while after university to really move away from looking at books that are rooted in the subject that you're working in. So for example, I hardly ever look at fashion books. I'll occasionally look at sort of historical costume books, but more often than not, the books that I find really exciting and that bring out some really new ideas are ones that aren't necessarily in the same discipline at all. This Vanessa Bell book is one of my favourite ones. It's just a small one, but the colourways that she uses in this one, you'll be able to see immediately, are ones that are so relevant to my work. I use this kind of palette again and again. And I think often if you force yourself to look at a different discipline to your own, it then pushes you to look at things and create them in your own light. One of the questions I get asked most is how you, when you're first creating a brand, create something that's really cohesive and that sits well together. And I think there's not a huge shortcut to doing that. It's not a very simple answer. But I think the more things you look at and the more things you learn what you like and how you use them, you sort of naturally end up developing an aesthetic that's your own. This is a book of all different sailor sketchbooks, and this is one I just find absolutely fascinating. All the different kind of imagery in here, these colour palettes I would just never have thought of if I'd not seen them in this context. And again, seeing them in a different discipline to my own is actually quite thrilling and really lovely to go through. Once I've picked colour palettes and things that I'm doing for a collection, I then do look at historical costume books just to create some new ideas around silhouette and fashion. This is one of my favourite ones, which is all to do with Korean textiles and Korean costumes. And you'll see from these, again, although this is a colour palette I'd never use, the kind of shapes within this is something that I really like lifting and then combining with my previous research, which is how you then develop something which is entirely your own. I look a lot at historical things because I find it really interesting to see all the things that have come before. And I think when you're working with antique textiles and vintage textiles like I do, it's very relevant to see how they've been used and see the different silhouettes. The other thing that I find really helps me develop my ideas is creating mood boards. I try and redo all the mood boards in my studio a few times a year. It's quite a long task once I start it because it's quite enticing to spend ages and ages doing them. I love gathering all different things that I know are going to be relevant, and then when you put them together and you can see them all layered amongst each other, you can start to see the themes evolve, which then become the recognisable style in what you're doing. So for example, with this one, I wouldn't have necessarily thought that sort of corals and reds would be that relevant to what I was working on. It has actually been something I've been really, really drawn to recently. I always love sort of flowers on dark backgrounds like that. And I think those sort of peachy pinks and the reds are something that I've really brought forward into my print design for the winter collection, which isn't something I'd anticipated at all. So I do think I get a lot of ideas that I wouldn't have landed on had I not created the mood board. I really like trying to put some different textures in there. I often put buttons in because the sort of vintage button cards they're on is just so beautiful in themselves. And then I really do try and add textiles as I go through. Seeing them all together is just, I find it really sort of stimulating and inspiring for then going on to create something from them and using them as a springboard. I often keep old bits of work, like this is a shadow puppet that I did for my A-levels, which at the time I didn't like at all. I think I'd looked at it for too long and it just didn't feel like how I wanted it to. But I kept it for years and now I can see that there's lots of ideas I took forward from it and I like it again now. So I do think with work as well, sometimes if you don't feel quite settled with it, it's worth putting it away to come back to it because you never know what sort of ideas you're pulling out of it from the future. And you can see how well it sort of sits with what I'm doing now, which proves I think it's all ticking away in your brain, even when you don't sort of feel like it's something that's been that relevant or that rewarding at the time. If I feel a bit stuck when I'm looking at something, it's good to have a place to go back to where you can see a sort of overarching theme of what you're working on. So if you do hit a bit of a creative block for any reason, it's good seeing a lovely 3D thing that you know is ultimately what you're working towards, what you want your aesthetic of the final piece to be. Don't be afraid to put some time and resources into your research. If you don't quite know where it's leading or you don't quite know what you want the aesthetic of your work to be yet, the main way that you're going to push through that is by taking the time to look at things that you find interesting. Sometimes it feels like it might not be the most productive practice to spend hours doing a mood board or to spend ages looking at colours in your sketchbook, but actually if you invest the time in that process to begin with and you pick out bits that you find really, really interesting, it will pay off when you're going on to do things further down the line with your creative practice. In part one, we spoke about finding your creative identity and the kind of aesthetic that you want to work in, and also more research-based work. Now I want to talk about launching your business and some practical tips to get you going on the way. When you're starting a creative business, it's really important to think about how you want to spend your days. You're going to have to wear a lot of hats as you go through doing social media and doing website work and all things like that. So it's important that you choose what you want to do and make sure you're focusing on the right parts of it. For example, I found that doing accountancy is never something I'm going to get on well with. I don't enjoy it and it's not my strength. So right from the start, I got a really good accountant that I knew I could trust, had a reasonable rate. And I think of it in the sense that if I can pay them for a day's work while I'm doing a day of sewing, then that's a brilliant exchange. I'd much rather be working on my creative work and doing things like that. I think a really important part when you start is don't be afraid to kind of take it seriously from the beginning. If that's like getting an accountant, it might feel like a bit of a big step or a bit daunting, but actually delegating jobs that aren't your strength is a really, really good way to make sure you're focusing on what you want to focus on. The other thing about starting is it's really important to make sure you don't put it off because you don't feel like you've got this perfectly developed, brilliant idea that's ready to go. I don't think any creative ever feels at that stage that they think, brilliant, I'm done, I'm ready to go for it. Just be aware that it's not going to be perfect the first time. And now I try and think of something when I'm launching something new, even if I know I've not quite got it how I want the end result to be. I get going, I speak to people about it and hear some feedback, and I try and tell myself if I'm getting nervous. I think, I can't wait to see what this looks like in 2 years when I've developed it even further. I'm really excited to see what this is going to be like when I've really got more experience in it. And I think pushing yourself forward that way and kind of propelling yourself into it is actually the best way to get going, because it's so easy to get stuck in the research stage and keep looking through your sketchbook and thinking you want to develop a little bit more before you get out there. But actually getting going is really, really key. Once you get going, you'll be able to start to identify your clients and the people that are really into your work and want to see more from you. I realised once I started that a lot of my clients were creatives, so a lot of artists from St Ives and creatives of all fields really. that was really handy to realise and be able to identify, because then I could start gearing all my events to that clientele, to that niche of people. But once I realised it was all artists, I started doing all my photo shoots in artist studios with the models looking as though they were painting or looking out to sea. And then with the actual selling events, I started doing them at Porthmeor Studios, which is a beautiful building that is really rooted in artistic history. And that meant that I was finding more of the clients that I wanted to by kind of making myself most visible in those spaces. And I could then kind of lean into that niche and find more and more clients. I think it's sometimes tempting to try and broaden what you're doing a lot. And although that definitely does have its benefits, actually being aware of the niche that you're in and kind of really making sure that you're appealing to those people is actually really, really beneficial, because sometimes finding a really solid, loyal following of people, even if it's a little bit smaller, is so beneficial long term if you know you're going to have returning customers and people that you have a relationship with. I think that's such a vital part of running a more long-term business. So far we've had part one, which was all about research and developing your style and deciding the type of business that you'd like to run. We've also had part two, which is launching your business and making it work for you, and practical tips along the way when you're first starting to get the business going and get it up and working. This final part, part three, is going to be about making the business into a job that works for you and your life, bearing in mind how you want to spend your days when you're working and pinpointing areas of the business that you want to expand. I really remember when my business started going to the next level and I started running it properly, I felt like I was spending all my days problem solving, and I thought that I must be doing something really wrong, that many problems were cropping up and I was spending all my time trying to create solutions. But I do think it's worth bearing in mind that actually that's just running a business, and it was just a bit of an adjustment and kind of shifting my mindset towards it, that there's always going to be problems and issues that you're dealing with. And the beauty of it being your business is that you get to come up with the solutions and make sure they're solutions that you're happy with and you want to do. It's really important once a business starts going to consciously think about which areas you want to expand, why, and whether that will work for you. I always think the payoff to being self-employed, which is stressful and unstable at times, is that you get a lot of choice and freedom over what you're doing. So I think you've got to definitely make sure that you force yourself to take advantage of that and actively work with it. Because I think sometimes it's really tempting to kind of go with the flow, and if there's people asking you to do things, to do that because, you know, there's a financial gain from it and things. But actually in the long term, if you can think about where you want to be and make sure that you do keep driving the business in that direction, it really does pay off. I have had clothing made in all different places and done more design work. But actually, once I was doing that, I missed a lot of the making. So that's when I kind of went back and started working with antique fabrics and using vintage things to make one-off pieces alongside having clothing made elsewhere as well. And that balance works really nicely for me. I really love getting to kind of flex my design muscles and do really interesting designs and work on print design and a lot of colour work. And then I also really enjoy having the other side of it, which is more to do with sewing and tailoring and actually working with textiles. I mean, I really missed working with fibre when I stopped doing that so much. So I think it's really nice to try and keep that balance as it suits you. And also, it can be really full-time running a business. It's like it's going to be beyond 9 to 5 on certain days. If there's something you really like doing, for example, on Wednesday mornings, I always go to the car boot. It means the shop opens late, but that's one of those things. It's something I love doing, and it's worth it to me to maybe lose a little bit of money closing the shop. But getting to do that, I find it really inspiring. I get fabrics for the shop ultimately. So I just think, bear in mind bits that you want to do and weigh up that you do get to choose to do those things. So even if sometimes it doesn't feel like the best business decision, actually it kind of is if you're feeling more inspired and you've got more time and it's just something that you find really feeds you and something you need to do in your life. Trying to start anything creative and turning it into kind of a commercial thing can be really, really daunting. I really hope this video has been helpful. It's really important to make sure you make the business work for you in your life, and that you're putting all your effort into something where you're getting a lot of payback and it's something that makes you really happy.